Welcome back. You're still watching Sunday Live, and it's 22 days to the general election, or if you like, 3 weeks and a day. Good evening and welcome to the State of the Race. My name is Sam Gituku, and I am in studio with Dr. Tom Wolf, a research analyst from TIFA Research. He'll be helping us to go through some of these this evening. On the road to the 9th of August, that we're heading to the date of the general election, we know that so far, IEBC is undertaking the training of officials, that is election officials, and the printing of ballot papers for various elections is ongoing. That we transition to something else that is looking at the campaign activity for the week, and that is Deputy President William Ruto this week to Turkana, Kakamega, Trans Nzoia, Vihiga, Narok, Nyamira, Kisii, and Migori counties. A separate team went back to Meru and Tharaka Nithi before converging in Kiambu County. Listen. All right, of course, those are the images of one of the campaign activities during the week. I want us now to listen to what Deputy President William Ruto had to say while there.
Kuna deep state Kenya hii ambayo mimi sijui kama naibu wa rais. Kuna system Kenya hii ambayo mimi sijui kama naibu wa rais. Si hawa watu wanaota ndoto ya mchana? Si wanaota ndoto ya mchana? Na mkiniona macho yangu hii, mimi ninakaa mtu ya kuibiwa kura.
So these are the counties that one William Ruto and the Kenya Kwanza team were touring, but during the same week, Raila Odinga was visiting some of the counties that I want to bring on board here so that you can see them. And part of that included moving, well, it's not cooperating. Yeah, there you go. So he was in Samburu, Narok, Nairobi, Taita Taveta, Kilifi, Mombasa, and Kwale, just some of the political activities, campaign activities during the week. Let's listen to what he had to say.
Tuambie wewe ingia kwa kiwanja. Tuingie na wewe. Tushikane na wewe. Ana kwa ana. Tuone nani atashinda nani. Kwa hivyo sisi hatuwezi kuogopa wewe bwana. Sisi tuko na watu. Tunajua Wakenya wako na sisi. Na tutashinda hiyo uchaguzi na 70% na kitu.
And this week, President Uhuru Kenyatta rejoined the campaign trail, pitching for the Raila Odinga Martha Karua ticket.
Naona ile barabara ambaye mzee na sasa amekanyanga hapo na mama ambaye hacheki ambaye anaitwa Martha Karua. Hawa ni watu ambao ni wa msimamo na ni wa haki. Tuseme ukweli bana. Hawa wengine ni wa mdomo na matusi.
Now, Uhuru's return to the campaign trail has not gone down well with Deputy President William Ruto. Here's what he says.
Na nimemwambia Uhuru Kenyatta, my friend, wewe mimi sishindani na wewe. Na hata siombi kura yako. Wewe kaa kando, waachia mimi bwana kitendawili nimalizane na yeye.
And now, Tom, the return of President Kenyatta to the trail, how does it hurt or injure the possibilities of Raila Odinga? But also, should Deputy President William Ruto be worried this time, knowing the state of politics?
Well, if I could answer that question, I'd be a very rich person. I mean, we've seen how the Deputy President has largely crafted his campaign messages on criticism, not just of the government's policies in the second term, starting with BBI, but also blaming the President for the handshake, or at least for basically disowning him. But nevertheless, it seems from campaign activities, and even today I saw earlier on your news broadcast, where the Deputy President was taking credit not only for helping President Kenyatta get elected twice, but also being behind him or with him in the onslaught from the ICC and blaming Raila Odinga for that. So it's obviously a two-edged sword, and I would find it fascinating to sit at some of their campaign strategy meetings, not only to see how they decide where to go and how much of those decisions of their campaign mapping is based on their own internal research, or how much it is to kind of counter where their opponents have gone, but also to what extent they're using that same kind of research to determine what their messages are, where they do focus groups and so on. But I guess you and I will have to wait till the election's over to get inside and do that kind of research. But it's clear that both of the candidates have a kind of, as I say, a double-edged sword with regard to the president.
Okay, all right. Of course, I will wait to see how that pans out on the election date. But let's focus now on the deputy presidential candidates of the two main political formations, Kenya Kwanza and Azimio la Umoja. Martha Karua from the Azimio la Umoja movement was this week endorsed by veteran women leaders before meeting with Gema communities living the coast. On the other hand, Rigathi Gachagua of Kenya Kwanza was back in the mountain, this time, of course, seeking to popularize the Kenya Kwanza team, and of course, going to different places, including Meru and Tharaka Nithi. But Tom, of course, looking at the activity by the two presidential candidates, that is deputy presidential candidates, that is Martha Karua and Rigathi Gachagua, and of course, you've seen some of the reports from the polling that you've done. Does the showing in the polls that suggest that they're not necessarily impacting on the showing of the presidential candidates, would it inform the policy that they're now taking, the strategy they're now taking?
I think that's correct. We have not yet seen, from our survey at the end of April, even leaving aside the one we did in the middle of May, when most Kenyans knew who the running mates were, but not all, and then at the end of June, we haven't seen a major shift in the distribution of expressed voting intentions, either in the Mount Kenya region as a whole, or especially with women nationally. For example, Deputy President Ruto's support, although overall a little bit below that of Raila in our last survey, he's about an even level of support. I think 40% among all men who are registered and say they're going to vote, 38% for women. With Raila, there's still a 10%, about I think 8% spread between men and women, with more men favoring him. I would guess, though, and I can't prove this, that if Martha Karua were not Raila's running mate, if he had a running mate from a different part of the country, neither the deputy president nor his running mate, Rigathi Gachagua, would be spending quite so much time on the mountain area. I think because former, cabinet minister Karua, she could be having, because Raila's numbers have been going up a little bit, she could be having just, if not more, of a positive impact among male voters. So I think, again, all the attention on the mountain is a reflection, not only the fact that even if overall the deputy president has a 2-to-1 margin in the surveys of all three companies that have been done lately, there are just so many votes there that even getting an extra couple of percent could be the difference on once they start counting the votes from August 9th.
All right. Of course, we'll continue with that when we look at the results from the different polls. But let's spend some more time, that is within Meru. There's some ugly scenes that we need to look at. Watch. So, of course, these were images in Meru. One, Rigathi Gachagua had gone there to campaign, and it was all good until Gachagua reached Mutuati area in Igembe North constituency. Supporters of two leading National Assembly contenders, that is Maure Mauka of Jubilee and UDA's Julius Taitumu and Naiba, could not tolerate each other. Listen.
The owner of the violence is Mithika Lenturi, the governor aspirant, and Taitumu, our local UDA desperate aspirant.
Lakini tunataka kuheshimia mheshimiwa Maore. What he is doing, hiyo ni kitu ambayo haiwezi kusaidia yeye.
Hapa Igembe North kuna wagombea 7. Na sijui ni wapi wale walirusha mawe wameandikwa jina ya Maore.
Hakuna maana ya uoga. Angoje tarehe 9 ile siku ambao watu wa Igembe North wataamua.
All right, those are the two candidates from Jubilee Party and the UDA. But let's quickly look at that race. It has attracted 7 candidates. Apart from the 2, there are Ntoida, an independent candidate. Joseph, you can see them here. That is Joseph Taitumu. And of course, there is Midiaru and Toida, Joseph Meruaki, there's Purity Kawera, and there's Muriki Munuru Pies of Usawa Party, and Wamataka Gwima Justas of PNU Party. And you may want to reflect on what transpired in 2017. This is how the polling was. That election, we had the current MP, Maure Mauka, winning with 17,500 votes, and of course followed closely by Julius Ntoanaiba Taitumu, who scored 11,792, and that is the gentleman now that is running on a UDA ticket. And then you have Ntomidiaru Ntoida, who had 10,917, still in the race, and Joseph Meruaki here had 10,215, this time round running on a different seat. So that's how the race is in that particular area in Igembe North constituency. Now let's focus on the campaign trail of what has been happening and why we need to focus on a different issue. That is the issue of the week, and that is the contentious status of the Mombasa port that sharply divides Kenya Kwanza candidate William Ruto and Azimio la Umoja candidate Raila Odinga. Listen.
Ile unyama ilifanyika, port operation ikatolewa kutoka Mombasa ikapelekwa Nairobi na Naivasha tarehe 10 mwezi wa 8. Tukimaliza uchaguzi tunarudisha port operation yote inarudi Mombasa hapa.
Wale ambao walitotoa bandari hapa wakapeleka Naivasha wanajulikana. Aliyepeleka kule Naivasha na kaenda kazindua huko sio mwingine. Ile ni nani? Ni nani? Yeye anakuwa kama ngiri. Anakuwa kama ngiri. Anasahau sana.
Well, those are the politicians, but let's spend a moment to have a look at the facts that are available and verifiable about the Mombasa port. And of course, on 30th of May 2017, President Uhuru Kenyatta, in the company of Deputy President William Ruto in Mombasa, flagged off the first cargo train to ride on the new standard gauge railway. Destination, Nairobi. At this time, there had been talk of putting up a dry port in Naivasha, and in December 2019, President Kenyatta again flagged off a cargo train from Nairobi to Naivasha, marking the start of operations at the Naivasha Inland Container Depot. Now, something else to note is that in March 2019, the Kenya Ports Authority had issued a directive that all cargo destined for Nairobi would have to be ferried on the SGR. There were protests in Mombasa by shippers and transporters fearing loss of livelihoods. In November 2020, the High Court suspended the directive requiring that public participation be conducted. Something else that you may want to know that is specifically on the facts of, you might be wondering what is the truth about the claim that port operations were moved from Mombasa to Nairobi and Naivasha. This is what we know. All basic port operations still continue at the Mombasa port. This includes berthing of ships and, of course, offloading. It can only happen where the sea meets the land. Clearance of loose cargo, meaning cargo that is not in containers, continues at the Mombasa port. Clearance of motor vehicle units remains in Mombasa. And what else continues? The clearance of containerized cargo that is destined for Mombasa and the coast remains there. And of course, that is a small proportion of all the cargo volume. So this has not been moving with me, but I'll try to, well, there we are. So that's what I was just about talking about. Well, we'll get back to it in a moment. But the next question is, what operations are at the Nairobi Inland Container Depot? An estimated 40% of the Mombasa port volume is moved via the SGR. Much of it lands at the Nairobi ICD in Embakasi. Clearance happens here, meaning once a vessel docks at the Mombasa port, the containers destined for Nairobi are transshipped to the cargo wagons on the SGR and moved straight to Nairobi for further processing by KPA officials and select container freight stations, or what you may call CFSs. This is what DP William Ruto says should return to Mombasa. Something else that you need to know. Let's just see, because you don't want you to miss anything in as far as this is concerned. This is what happens. Upon clearance, truckers pick up the containers. This is in Nairobi, actually, what has been happening. They pick containers for onward transportation to the rest of the country. The other question is about what happens in Naivasha. And Again, yes, there, it worked. This is the clearance point for cargo destined for neighboring countries. We are talking about Uganda, Rwanda, and South Sudan, which with intention to expand to other neighboring countries within the East African community. Get this, majorly it is only cargo for neighboring countries that goes to NAIVASHA. Now, reports indicate there are no CFS funds, and it is only KP officials that are involved in NAIVASHA. Something else that we need to point to you at is that in the NAIVASHA dry port is an expansive space of about 1,000 acres. It has the capacity to process 2 million tons of cargo every year, and it was meant to be a catalyst for the NAIVASHA Special Economic Zone, an industrial hub dreamt about by the current administration, that is the Jubilee administration. And so what has been going on, that is, has been the impact of the shifts in cargo processing from Mombasa to Nairobi and Naivasha. The coast politicians say that the container freight stations' economies were affected. Initially, CFSs would handle up to 85% of the cargo docking at Mombasa. It is now down to about 20%. Some CFSs have had to relocate some of their operations to remain in business. Truckers and transporters had their livelihoods affected, especially with a reduced distance to cover if they have to shift to pick up cargo from Nairobi. But the movement of these operations has also been good news for port managers and some users. It was meant to decongest the Mombasa port, which it has. It was meant to improve the efficiency. It has. Now, cargo can be cleared within 48 hours or at most 4 days. It was also meant to enhance revenue collection and rid tax evasion, which we understand that so far it has been able to do. So as the politicians compete for the attention of the coastal voters, what would be the impact of reverting the said port operations to Mombasa as the politicians have promised? I don't know if you have an answer about this, Tom, and of course how important it is, especially for the coastal voters.
I think it's very important, especially in the context of the general economic challenges that the country is facing. And we saw that overall at the coast, Raila's percentage of the vote dropped by 10% from 2013, when he had about 75% of the entire coastal region vote. That came down to about 65% in the last election. So even if it is generally characterized as an ODM or a pro-Raila Odinga area, like most other parts of the country, it's highly contested. And I think the complexity of these facts that you've given us also, I think, suggests the importance of a presidential debate, which you can correct me, as far as I know, it's still not clear if it's going to take place between the two leading candidates.
It will take place. The question is about the attendance.
Because I think these are the kinds of issues where we need to forget the past, who was quiet or who was cheering at the time that this was launched. But we need to have a chance to hear directly from the two candidates what their position is. At the moment, from the little I've seen, their positions are basically the same. If the entire NAIVASHA dry port operation is returned to Mombasa, I'm not sure what that does to the economic or financial viability of the SGR, and what the implications would be for repaying that loan. But again, I hope this is something that I can also learn if we have a presidential debate, and you as perhaps one of the people there can put that question to our two contenders.
Of course, it's an issue that we continue to pursue because it's of economic significance to the country. And now to the battle lines as defined by recent opinion polls. I'm sure, Tom, you love this. This week, InfoTrack Research and Tifa Research released their opinion poll results that show Odinga still in the lead at an average of 42.5%, while Ruto follows with 36%. Wajakoya is now at 4%, while David Mora Waihiga was only reported on by InfoTrack at 0.1%, which you can see there. But of course, the undecided appears we are now at an average of 13, InfoTrack reporting 16% and Tifa reporting 10%. But it gets more interesting when you get deeper to the analysis, especially on the performance of the alliances. So you see Azimio la Umoja has 43% under InfoTrack, 42% under Tifa, so that's an average of 42.5%. Kenya Kwanza 38 under InfoTrack and Tifa 35, so it comes to about 36.5% in terms of on average. But there are some regional popularities that have been reported, which becomes a bit interesting. That is, of course, talking about, first, we listen to what the presidential candidates have to say about the opinion polls results that have come in.
wamebaki na fake opinion poll. Kazi yao ni kwenda kuchora opinion poll. Wao sijui nani yako mbele, sijui nani yako mbele. Wacha kutusumbua na opinion poll. Wananchi wa Kenya wako tayari kuamua tarehe 9 mwezi wa 8.
Hata leo wameonyesha baba ako mbele, ingawaje na point kidogo, lakini tunajua ni nyingi zaidi. Watu wameamua, watu milioni 15 watampigia Raila tarehe 9 mwezi ujao.
All right, so please note those sentiments, Tom. Let's look at this in greater detail. First, I have to say here that the classification of political zones by both TIFA and Infotrack are in variance in some regions and therefore a little difficult to analyze the differences. In Central Rift, for instance, according to TIFA, Ruto leads with 63% against Odinga's 20%. Infotrack reduces that rating to 58% for Ruto, but looking at the North Rift region slightly differently from TIFA. There is a bit of coherence in areas of the coast, Mount Kenya and Nyanza, but there is a real contrast in some parts of Lower Eastern. For instance, we'll be looking at that. You see that TIFA is saying that Odinga leads with 46%, but Infotrack says 54%. You see Ruto is still in Lower Eastern, 29% under TIFA, Infotrack 25%. And one wonders, of course, we'll be looking at more regions. For instance, in Nairobi, you can see that there's a bit of difference. Under William Ruto, it's almost the same, 28%, 30%. But under TIFA, 58%, but Infotrack, 49% for Raila Odinga. Another difference that you'll spot is especially in Nyanza. Look, TIFA has 68%, Infotrack 73%, then so close for William Ruto. Northern, again, the categorization of the countries that fall under Northern are a bit different between TIFA and Infotrack. But Tom, if opinion polling is a science, then we shouldn't be seeing a lot of these differences. So how do you explain it? You're sampling the same people, coming up with different results.
It's easy. If we had more time, we could go through all these regions. But I think if you can remember the figures you've just read off, you will see that for these different regions of the country, what we call zones, and you're correct, they differ a little bit from Infotrack's and a little different also from Radio Africa. But if we take the ones that are the same, like Nyanza, Western, Nairobi, I forget the other ones, Lower Eastern, you'll see that what neither company does, or none of them, including Radio Africa, we don't show the statistical margin of error for each of these zones. Mm-hmm. And if you, and maybe we should do this in future, I'll see if our next survey we can do this, based on the populations or the populations of registered voters mm-hmm. in these different zones, we have margins of error basically proportionate to the size of those populations. Mm-hmm. So that in a place like South Rift, that for TIFA is only 2 counties, Kajiado and Narok. That means, I don't remember the exact, but I think only 5% of our total national sample is taken from South Rift. Mm-hmm. And that means that in a sample of 1,500 or so, there were only something like 40 or 50 people who were interviewed there. Okay. So the margin of error is going to be 3 times greater than what it is for Kenya as a whole, plus or minus 2.7 or whatever that was. Mm. So if you actually looked at the margins of error for, like here, Central Rift, you see for Ruto there's a difference of 5%. That's within that margin of error. For Raila, it's the same. It's within the margin of error. Mm. But unless we help you people in the media to know that these are basically within the margin of error, meaning they're statistically identical, that would make your job a lot easier. So I will try to convince my boss that we should do that in future. Okay,
all right, that's interesting. And actually, as you talk about South Rift, you can see the difference is quite clear. 33% TIFA for Ruto, 54% by Infotrack.
I should also say, though, that because especially Kajiado is ethnically so diverse. Okay. In fact, as I was told by an assistant to one of your gubernatorial candidates from Kajiado the other Sunday here, that Maasai only constitute about half the population in Kajiado now. And our survey data show more or less the same thing. Now, I'm not saying that all voting or even opinion poll verbal voting is ethnic. Okay. But unless we could compare the distribution of the sample from these three different companies, in this case, the two, Infotrack and TIFA, to make sure that the ethnic distribution was basically the same, education, religion, age, gender, occupation. Then without that, we can't know if the results are really comparable, even taking the margin of error into account.
Okay, all right. And of course, Infotrack research shows that Odinga leads in 21 counties, terming them battlegrounds, but Ruto then leads in 16, and of course, calling them this, Raila Odinga strongholds, not battlegrounds, and then for Ruto leads in 16, which are majorly in Mount Kenya and the Rift. There are 10 counties deemed to be battlegrounds, where Odinga leads in 6 of them. So this is how the map is looking. The blue ones is where Infotrack, according to Infotrack, those are the strongholds of Raila Odinga. The yellow ones, those are the strongholds for William Ruto. The red ones, those are battlegrounds. This is how they are looking in specific terms. For instance, if you had to look at these regions, they are 10 in total, but Raila Odinga leads in 6, then William Ruto leads in 4. But this is very different from some figures that we got towards the end of May that showed that out of 11 battlegrounds, Raila Odinga was leading in only 3, and William Ruto was leading in the remaining 8. So this is quite a conversion. If you look at Marsabit, very close. I mean, 41-40, so that qualifies for, I would say, battleground. But look at an area like Mombasa, 46% for Raila Odinga, 27% for William Ruto. Does that qualify for battleground? Compare that with Nakuru, where you have 30% for Raila Odinga, 48% for Nakuru. I mean, that's 18% to the advantage of Ruto. Is that a battleground, really?
Well, I think it's unfortunate that, at least in the Nation article that reported this Infotrack survey, we weren't given a definition of what battleground means. How narrow does the gap have to be in the percentages of the two candidates for it to win that label? But I think more important, and I don't want to make a career out of questioning a competing company, but even with a very generous sample size for both of their last two surveys of 9,000, if you divide that by 47 counties, you get an average of about 180 respondents per county. Now, Infotrack, at least as reported in April, I can't remember from last week if I saw the figures, they apportioned their sample precisely according to the distribution of population, whether census 2019 or registered voters. So I believe they had slightly over 1,000 interviews in Nairobi, and in very sparsely populated places like Lamu and Tana River, 50 respondents or fewer. Now, as I just told you a moment ago, the margins of error, once you get below a couple of hundred, are so wide, they're going to be bigger than the differences between these candidates. I think based on the April survey, even of the counties that were classified as strongholds, when you actually looked at the margin of error, I think there were 5 of them where the results, although they look very big, 15, 20% or more between Raila and Ruto, they actually fell within the margins of error of those particular counties. So I would say, you know, if you can't have a sample size overall of 20 or 30,000, it's safer statistically to limit your analysis to those counties that have a minimum of 300 or 400. One other thing I will say, and I'm criticizing you people in media here, not Infotrack. Battlegrounds is not an appropriate term for the Kenyan electoral system. Unlike the US, where whichever presidential candidate wins the most votes in that state, even if they win by 1 vote, they win all the electoral votes of that state. So all the other votes are wasted. So you can't call the Kenyan system a battleground where every vote counts. You know very well that in an American presidential election, a Democratic candidate will never go to the Central Plains where they're farmers, or the Deep South, because they're all Republicans. They could never win those electoral votes. In Kenya, as we've seen, even in what you might say is a stronghold, Luo Nyanza or Kalenjin part of the Rift Valley, every single vote is going to help you get to that 50% plus 1. So please, you and your colleagues in media, stop using this battlegrounds term. Tom, it doesn't make sense. This
is not my term. It's based on reports from pollsters, and that's what I'm just reporting.
We never would use it.
Okay, all right. You won't use it. It's being used by Infotrack. We'll report about it. Now, to the key races this week, Mike Mbuvi Sonko, the second governor of Nairobi, is in darkness after the Supreme Court dismissed his appeal against his impeachment of 2020. This was just a day after he had been cleared by IEBC to run for MOMBASA governorship seat following a court order from the High Court. And as we await a directive from the IEBC, Sonko will find it very difficult to be on the ballot on the 9th of August. So who are the candidates in the MOMBASA governorship race? Let's just look at them. Here they are. We are talking about one Hezron Awiti from VDP, Hassan Omar from UDA, William Kingi from Pamoja African Alliance, Daniel Kitsao, an independent candidate, Shafi Mwaganda of UPIA, Abdul Somad Sharif from ODM, and Said Abdallah Omari of Usawa. The other race that we need to focus on is the Isiolo governorship seat. That is, of course, has attracted some 5 candidates. And, of course, we are talking about Godana Doyo, an independent candidate, Hussein Dabaso of UDA, Abdi Ibrahim Hassan of Jubilee, John Machuguma of Safina, Kenneth Turibu of PNU, and Halake Wako, former CEO of EACC under ODM. Of course, those are 6, not 5, like I had said. And of course, in recent TIFA polls, it was showing that the first gentleman there was ahead in terms of popularity, followed by Abdi Ibrahim Hassan of the Jubilee Party. Of course, that's in as far as Isiolo is concerned. But let's now cross to the hits and misses for the week. And to the hits and misses, we begin with the hits. Let me just scroll. Yeah, there you have it. We start here in Nairobi, and the hit goes to Nairobi governorship candidates, including Johnson Sakaja and UDA and Polycarp Igathe of Jubilee Party. The hit also goes to the media fraternity for a successful first debate in a series of 3 presidential debates. We'll be waiting to see what happens in the new week. The miss of the week goes to... There you have it. Goes to the Deputy President William Ruto and his junior in cabinet, that is Defense Cabinet Secretary Eugene Wamalwa. Listen why.
Jamaa mwingine nilimpatia kazi ya waziri. Ati mimi sijui nilikuwa nataka kumchapa kofi. Hey, mimi nataka nimwambie hawa jamaa. Anaongea. Unajua una bichi. Huku kwetu hatuchapi kofi wanawake. Ndio.
Today, William Ruto, you have stooped the lowest you have in your public life. What you say today, now, the insults against Eugene Wamalwa was quite unprecedented.
Now, there's truly nothing more to say to this. It's a miss from the country's leadership. On the road ahead this week, the wait continues on the IEBC to conduct its second test run on the election technology, specifically on the results transmission system by the IEBC for the presidential election. This week also, the deputy presidential candidates expected to debate each other on Tuesday, where Martha Karua will debate Rigathi Gachagua as Ruth Musheru debates Justina Wamai. And finally, the presidential campaigns continue across the country, each candidate crisscrossing different parts of the country. We know that William Ruto will be in parts of Lower Eastern and the coast as Raila Odinga heads to the parts. He is already in Nairobi and will be heading to, yes, expecting parts of North Rift. Yes, that is North Rift. And with that, I wish to thank Dr. Tom Wolf for making time for us for this week's State of the Race, and we'll do this again next week.
Thank you for not asking me a question about these attacks on opinion polls, so I don't lose my profession.
Okay, all right. Of course, my name is Sam Gituku. That's where we end it. See you again next week on another episode of State of the Race as we get closer to the election, now standing at 3 weeks and a day to that very important date. Bye for now.